Morning everybody, or whatever time of day it is where you are. Today I want to tell you all about my new lens, which you can't really see much of because I put it in front of all my dark clothing. But basically it's a Sigma 20mm 1.4 art lens, and it's bigger, heavier and wider, to be honest, of a prime lens than I ever thought I'd be interested in. Up until about a month ago, I'd suggest. And well, now I love it. I've not even taken any photos with it yet, but I'm very, very, very excited about this lens, and I'm going to tell you why. First though, I do want to go and take some photos with it. Unfortunately, that has to be in exactly the same place that I shot last week's video while I was walking around with my GoPro strapped to my chest and taking photos on my phone. Still locked down here in Wales, so you have to stay local. So I'm going to go back there and take some photos instead, this time with this. Again, probably largely of boats and rope and stuff. Yeah, I'm basically in exactly the same spot that I was to record the video last week. Different conditions. It's grey skies today, concrete skies, which is more akin to what it's like a lot of the time here, but never mind. The aim of the game is not to get portfolio photos today, it's to test this at a range of different apertures, and I suppose just to get an idea of the overall performance, which, to be honest, I already kind of got to grips with through reading reviews, as you always do when you buy a new lens. But anyway, I'll shut up and I'll get on with it. Starting with, maybe a bit oddly, f9. Get a sense of how it performs stop down across the frame. It is very wide, this. I know I sound surprised, but I'm not used to a prime of this kind of focal length. Just need to be a lot closer to stuff than normal. f1.4, focusing on those boats in the background. Right, some detail shots. I know I got photos of this boat last week, but it's a nice boat. Pretty good autofocus performance so far, I'd say, in my 2 minutes out testing the lens. 1.4. Oh yeah, this was probably my favourite shot from last week. It's almost like they parked the yellow boat in the perfect position for the yellow sign. Very nice of them. But I shouldn't take this at... Oh, I missed the bird. I shouldn't take this at 1.4. 7.1 is probably about right. I've got the camera currently set up to have a minimum shutter speed of a 15th of a second, which actually, for places like this, I think is probably too slow. Let's go up to 80th of a second. I've got the aperture for it, so probably not worth waiting for another bird, I don't think. I like these ropes. You do need to be close with this lens. Not really used to having a prime this wide. Oh, look, a COVID sign. Makes for a nice subject, doesn't it? f5. Well, I've changed my shutter speed again because this is the beauty of f1.4. I'm shooting in the dark at a 15th of a second at ISO 100. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really do want you to go and check out last week's video if you haven't seen it, but I am photographing largely the same stuff. That probably just about does it for mediocre photos of boats and stuff. I'd suggest I'll bring this back down actually. I've made some changes, as you can see, to this office this week. It's coming on slowly. I've still not got frames because apparently there's a production problem with the frames. I don't really understand what that could be. They've run out of wood or glue, I suspect. Maybe that's it. But yeah, still no frames. I do have a bookcase, no other furniture yet, but I also have electronic legs on this table, which are sturdier than the last ones, and a few of you in the comments will be pleased about that, I know. Anyway, we're slowly getting there, and back to talking about this lens. So yeah, I've been out with it once. I've not taken any photos to write home about with it yet. And even so, I'm comfortable suggesting that this is definitely the coolest lens I've ever bought and the one that I'm most excited about shooting with in the future. The question is, why have I bought it? Right, so a couple of months ago, you might remember, I was walking up Snowdon and I was telling you about the first two lenses that I'd bought for my S5 and my full frame setup. The first of them was this 70-200 f4 lens, and the second was the 16-35 f4 that I'm filming on now. Two brilliant lenses, but they leave a couple of holes in the setup. The first hole is the fact that obviously they're both f4 lenses and therefore they're not particularly good in low light. And the second was that there's a gap between 35mm and 70mm, and my plan was to buy two more lenses to fill those gaps. Now, the first of those I planned to be the 24mm 1.8 from Lumix, which hasn't been released yet. That was going to be my low light wide angle lens. And the second of those lenses was going to be a 50mm 1.8. Again, that hasn't been released yet, but that was going to be a low light sort of mid lens, and it was going to fill the gap between 35mm and 70mm. That was the plan, and as far as the 50mm goes, that still is the plan. However, where things have changed is that rather than go for the 24mm 1.8, I have opted to go for the 20mm 1.4. So this 20mm has a couple of advantages over a 24mm 1.8. It's 2/3 of a stop wider, which means in theory it should be a little bit better in low light, and it has been released, which the 24mm hasn't so far. I don't know when it will be. It's not a massive problem at the moment, given that I can't really go out and take the sort of photos I want to take anyway. But when lockdown is lifted, I want to go straight for the mountains. I'm going to make a beeline to the mountains with my tent, my new down sleeping bag, my new sleeping pad, the works. I've spent a fortune on camping gear at a time when you can't go camping. But when you can, I'm going straight to the mountains. And I wanted a lens that I was going to be able to take advantage of those trips on immediately. And the other obvious thing that I've come to think of as an advantage for this lens over a 24mm is that obviously it's a bit wider, and I haven't always thought that that would be an advantage. So I would suggest that up until a couple of months ago, I'd have taken a 24mm prime over a 20mm prime every day of the week. I would have just considered a 24mm prime so much more versatile than a 20mm. However, since I've been shooting with the 16-35, which I bought to try and get more into wide angle photography, I have loved it, and I've come to realise that for my photography, I actually think this, the wider version of the primes, is going to be more versatile for my needs. And when I'm out in the mountains taking photos in blue hour, I think this is going to be incredible. I think it's also going to be great for things like the northern lights, astrophotography, although reading reviews, there's quite a lot of coma that you get with this lens. I'm not particularly fussed. I'm not a pixel badger. Pixel badger, that's not the term, is it? Pixel peeper, I think. I think you still get the idea from badger. Basically, what I'm saying is that I think there will be lots of applications for this lens that I'm very, very excited about. Blue hour, I would suggest, is probably my favourite time of day to take photos. And it's the time of day that I've taken least photos in my photography quest so far. You know, in the past I've not really woken up on time a lot, or I've just wanted to come home for my dinner, and therefore I've missed blue hour on both ends of the day. I think this lens though will provide me enough excitement and motivation to get up and get out for blue hour in the morning and to stay out for blue hour at night. And I can't wait to see what it brings me. It's not a perfect lens by any means. This, I reckon, weighs more than my Micro Four Thirds system put together. It's nearly a kilogram, which is a big, heavy lens for me, considering that I have come from Micro Four Thirds. But this is a specialist lens. I'm not going to take this out with me all the time, every shoot. And if I'm going somewhere to take photos, if I'm walking up a mountain in a day hike and I know I'm going to be back at my car before the light gets low, then chances are I'm probably still going to be taking my Micro Four Thirds gear. I'm pointing over there because on that new bookshelf is all my Micro Four Thirds gear. But if I'm going to go on like a multi-day bikepacking trip, or I'm going somewhere that I know I'm going to be shooting extensively in low light and I only want to take one system, that is where the full frame system comes in. And unfortunately it means I have to lug around things like this. I'll hopefully be rewarded with incredible low light photos though. So yeah, this is not a perfect lens by any means. It doesn't mean though that I'm not absolutely ecstatic to have bought it. And I say it's not a perfect lens. One of the biggest complaints with it is that it's got this bulbous front element, which means you can't add filters to it. Not the end of the world for me, to be honest. I rarely use filters, but I could see that being annoying for lots of photographers. It's probably more annoying from a video standpoint for me. Video, that's the other reason I bought this lens. So this 16-35 that I'm filming on right now, this is set to 20mm. It just so happens that 20mm is the focal length that seems to be about right for filming in this room. Unfortunately, this lens, as I mentioned before, is f4, so you don't get particularly good shallow depth of field, and I have to raise the ISO to, it's ISO 400 at the moment. This lens, I'll be able to shoot at, say, f2, so I can use the base ISO, and I should have a nicer, shallower depth of field. This is what the 20mm 1.4 looks like, by the way, in case you're interested, at f2.2. I actually can't go any wider than that without sticking a filter on. So, eating my words a bit. Never mind. Probably the most used application of this lens, to be honest, will be sat on this camera here in this room while I talk nonsense. I think if you'd have told me a year ago that I'd have a lens like this, I would have thought you were mad, because I just had absolutely no interest in certainly a lens as heavy as this. But yeah, I've become much more excited about the prospect of low light stuff, and therefore this becomes necessary. Anyway, thank you very much for putting up with my waffling again, and thank you also for putting up with my, what I would consider quite mediocre photos over the past few weeks. It's difficult in lockdown to run a photography channel, and to be honest, I'll probably end up doing indoor videos from here on out about editing tips and tutorials and stuff, because, well, that's just better than going out taking photos that you're not quite happy enough to show on YouTube, but you still have to because you've made a video for YouTube. That said, when I do that, typically your comments are all still really kind, so I really appreciate that, and it means a lot. And also a big thank you to this week's video sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare is an amazing online learning platform with thousands of classes in all kinds of different topics, from personal development, illustration, design, music production, crafts, photography, all kinds of stuff. I've just finished a course by Chris Burkard, one of my favourite all-time photographers, and that's just one of loads of photography classes covering all kinds of different topics within photography. And as I said, there are loads of other things that you can learn on the platform too. And if you've got any interest in learning about any of those topics, then the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get access to a free trial of Skillshare Premium. And if you decide to carry on your membership after that, then you'll pay less than $10 a month to keep access to all that good stuff. So a big thank you to Skillshare. I've learned loads since being a member there, and I'd really recommend you checking it out. Thank you to them for their continued support of this channel. And again, thank you to you for watching. Next week, I imagine I'll probably be sat here talking about Lightroom or something, because I don't really want to go and take any more photos of boats and stuff. Hopefully you understand. I imagine you understand. You're probably sick of it. I'll see you then.